In 1967, Johnny Cash crawled into a cave, planning never to come out. His flashlight died deep inside, and he lay in complete darkness, waiting to die. But something happened in that cave that changed everything. Years later, in 2003, he filmed a music video that showed his body failing and his wife watching him with quiet love. She died just 4 months before he did. Between the cave and that final video was a secret battle nobody saw. Today, we're uncovering what really happened to the man in black. J.R. Cash came into the world on February 26, 1932. In Kingsland, Arkansas, right when the Great Depression was squeezing the last breath out of working families. He was the fourth of 7 children, and his parents were 2 poor cotton farmers who were trying to stay afloat. Ray Cash worked jobs for 15 or 20 cents an hour, sometimes earning no more than $2 a day. There were days he walked 3 miles to find work, any work, just so his children could eat. They couldn't even settle on a name for their boy, so they just gave him initials, Junior, which stood for nothing at all. That boy was hauling water to cotton fields by the time he was 5 and picking cotton himself by age 8. Singing in the fields because the rhythm helped dull the pain in his back. Those fields, that work, and that silence shaped him. When Junior was 3, the family moved to Das Colony, a New Deal project set up in Mississippi County by Franklin Roosevelt's administration. It was designed to give poor families a second chance. They were given a 5-room house with no plumbing and 20 acres of mostly uncleared land. Clearing it by hand became the new job. Cotton was still the crop. If they worked hard enough and stayed long enough, they could own it. That dream kept people going. The colony tried to support itself with a cooperative hospital, a school, a china factory, even a mattress and toy factory. But most of that didn't last. What did last was the dirt, the work, and the lessons. Junior grew up in that house wearing hand-me-down clothes, sometimes sleeping in the same bed as his brothers. Eventually, they bought out some abandoned land nearby and grew their farm to 40 acres. It was in that little house where his mother, Carrie, a devout Pentecostal, began teaching him the gospel hymns that would stay with him his whole life. She had an old guitar and piano, and when she wasn't working, she taught her son to play and to believe that music was a gift from God. She saved money just to get him singing lessons, but after 3 classes, the teacher told her he didn't need them. Said his voice was already perfect the way it was. He started writing songs at 12. He sang what he felt and wrote what he couldn't say aloud. After she died in 1991, he kept her old hymn book close. In 2003, months before he passed, he made a quiet little album called My Mother's Hymn Book, just his voice and his guitar, singing the hymns she once taught him, calling it the most important work of his life. But before music ever became a career, his life was shaped by something deeper and darker. His father, Ray, made no secret that his favorite was Jack Jr.'s older brother. Jack was stronger, more serious, and had already committed to becoming a preacher at age 14. Every night, Jack would sit at the table reading the Bible while Junior watched. People said Jack was destined. Junior, by contrast, was often scolded for being silly or careless. In the family's hardest moment, that difference grew into a wound that never healed. On May 12, 1944, Jack went to work at the school's agriculture shop, splitting logs and defense posts with an industrial saw. J.R. begged him to skip work and go fishing instead. He even brought 2 poles, hoping to change his brother's mind. Jack refused, said they needed the money. That day, the saw ripped through his body from abdomen to chest. He pulled himself off the table and crawled for help, making the injury worse. Some say a neighbor was with him and disappeared afterward. Johnny later said, "I always thought of it as murder." Jack didn't die right away. He lasted 8 days. At the end, he became lucid, said goodbye to each family member, then turned to his mother and said, "Mama, can you hear the singing? Do you see the angels?" When she said no, Jack said, "Oh, I do. How beautiful." Then he died at 6:44 a.m. on May 20th. Their father, Ray, turned cold. At the funeral, he stared at Johnny. At home, he shook an empty can and said, "You hear that? That's nothing. That's what you are." Johnny never forgot that. By 1950, just after turning 18, Junior enlisted in the United States Air Force, adopting the name John R. Cash because the military didn't allow initials. He trained in Texas, first at Lackland, then Brooks Air Force Base, where they noticed his talent for hearing patterns and noise. He became a Morse code interceptor and could decode 40 words per minute. They sent him to Landsberg, Germany, with the 12th Radio Squadron Mobile, a Cold War unit housed in what had once been the very prison where Hitler wrote Mein Kampf. It was lonely work, secretive, repetitive, nerve-wracking, and the only call home was once a year. During this time, Johnny claimed to have intercepted and reported the first Western intelligence about Joseph Stalin's death on March 5, 1953. Even before Eisenhower heard it. But not everyone believed it. Some colleagues later said he didn't know Russian and couldn't have decoded it. Still, Johnny clung to the story. He said, "I was the ace." The stress gave him insomnia, and the insomnia brought pills. At Landsberg, he bought his first guitar from the commissary and formed a group with fellow airmen called the Landsberg Barbarians. They played country and gospel at the mess hall and officer clubs. They recorded crude demos on a wire recorder. He began experimenting with rhythm, lyrics, and the baritone that would later become his signature. A fellow airman named C.V. White guarded his blue suede shoes like treasure. And when Johnny later told that story to Carl Perkins, it became a hit. Johnny also watched a prison film while stationed there. Inside the walls of Folsom Prison, which planted the seed for one of his most iconic songs. He was honorably discharged on July 3, 1954. After 4 years, he returned to Texas and married Vivian Liberto, who had waited for him through 4 years and countless letters. They moved to Memphis, where he sold appliances door to door and took radio classes at Kaiser College. But civilian life didn't sit well with him. He'd gone from decoding Cold War secrets to selling washing machines. Something had to give. In late 1954, he met two mechanics, Luther Perkins and Marshall Grant, who played music on weekends. They clicked instantly. They called themselves the Tennessee Two. They practiced gospel mostly. With his beat-up $5 German guitar, Johnny walked into Sun Records and auditioned for Sam Phillips. Phillips didn't care for gospel, told him it wouldn't sell. So Johnny came back with a song called Hey Porter, inspired by a train ride home, and another one called Cry. Cry, Cry. Phillips signed them, Cry, Cry, Cry. Sold over 100,000 copies in the South and reached number 14 on the Billboard Country chart. 14 on the Billboard Country chart. It got him a spot on the Louisiana Hayride Tour with Elvis Presley. Then came Folsom Prison Blues, written in Germany but recorded in Memphis on July 30, 1955. It came out that December, was So Doggone Lonesome, and climbed to number 4 country. Number 17 pop. The line "I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die" was written on purpose to shock. He later settled a lawsuit for about $75,000 because the song borrowed heavily from Gordon Jenkins's 1953 tune Crescent City Blues. In 1957, Cash released his first LP, Johnny Cash, with his hot and blue guitar, the first album Sun Records ever released. It had I Walk the Line, which stayed number 1 on country charts for 6 weeks and cracked the top 20 pop. Recorded in the Echo Havey studio at 706 Union Avenue. It used paper stuck under guitar strings to mimic a drum. No drummer, just grit. By then, he was outselling everyone at Sun, even Elvis. But things weren't good behind the scenes. In 1958, Johnny Cash walked out of Sun Records. He'd had enough. They were giving him 3% royalties when the standard was 5%, and Sam Phillips was more focused on Jerry Lee Lewis. But what really broke him was when they refused to let him record gospel. That wasn't just a creative whim, gospel had always been part of who he was. He left for Columbia Records and right away recorded Don't Take Your Guns to Town. It came out in December and hit number 1 on the country charts, staying there for 6 weeks. It even crossed over to number 32 on the pop charts. He expanded his band from the Tennessee Two to the Tennessee Three when W.S. Fluke Holland joined as drummer in 1960. Holland had worked with Carl Perkins and played on Blue Suede Shoes. From that moment, that boom chicka boom sound was locked in. From here, the story continues through fame, addiction, redemption, and collapse, eventually leading back to that dark cave in 1967 where Johnny Cash's life nearly ended and was reborn. After Key Largo, Claire Trevor became one of Hollywood's most respected actresses. But few people knew that behind her composed, elegant demeanor was a woman who had paid a deep emotional price for her art. That unforgettable Oscar performance, the trembling voice, the raw pain in her eyes, wasn't acting. It was real emotion, drawn from a place deep inside her. When she spoke those words on screen, she was reliving heartbreak from her own life. Director John Huston, known for his brilliance and cruelty in equal measure, pushed her harder than anyone ever had. He demanded perfection, even if it meant breaking his actors. Claire later confessed that Huston refused to let her rehearse her key scene. She had to walk in, cold, unprepared, terrified, and sing. When the camera rolled, the entire set went silent. What came out of her wasn't just a song, it was a cry from the soul. When the scene ended, even the crew had tears in their eyes. That single take would win her an Academy Award. But for Claire, it wasn't a triumph, it was a wound. She later said, "I wasn't sure whether to thank John Huston or hate him." Through the 1950s and 60s, she continued to work. But the industry was changing. The golden glow of old Hollywood was fading. Replaced by younger stars and new styles, Claire began taking fewer roles, preferring the quiet of home over the chaos of fame. She found peace later in life, painting, traveling, and mentoring young actors. To her, the measure of success wasn't fame, but truth. She often told her students, "Don't act the scene. Feel it. The audience knows when you're lying." And that's what made Claire Trevor unforgettable. She wasn't the loudest or the flashiest. She was real in a time when Hollywood was built on illusion. Today, her name might not trend on social media, but her legacy lives in every actor brave enough to bare their soul for a role. Because long before method acting had a name, Claire Trevor lived it. Her voice still echoes through Hollywood's history, fragile, strong, and hauntingly human. Claire Trevor's story is a reminder that behind every award, every applause, and every spotlight, there's a human being often carrying invisible pain. She once said in an interview, "They remember the glamour, but they forget the loneliness." That loneliness was something she carried with quiet dignity throughout her life. When she accepted her Academy Award for Key Largo, she smiled gracefully, but her eyes told another story. It wasn't about victory, it was about survival. The applause faded that night, but the truth behind her performance never did. In her later years, she lived far from the noise of Hollywood. In a quiet home by the ocean, friends said she would often sit by the window, watching the waves, her Oscar sitting quietly on a nearby shelf, not as a symbol of fame, but of endurance. When Claire Trevor passed away in 2000, she left behind more than just films. She left behind a legacy, one of courage, vulnerability, and truth. Because for Claire, acting was never about pretending, it was about feeling, and in that feeling, she gave the world something timeless. So, the next time you watch Key Largo, look into her eyes, not the script, not the lines, but the truth that lived beneath them. That truth was Claire Trevor. And that's what made her unforgettable. Hollywood may have forgotten her name, but her soul lives forever on film. Claire Trevor's rise to fame didn't happen overnight. She started on the stage in New York, long before anyone in Hollywood knew her name. She wasn't born into privilege. She didn't have powerful connections. What she had was talent and grit. In the early 1930s, when sound was still new to film, she signed a small contract with Fox Studios. She worked tirelessly, taking every role offered, even the ones that didn't flatter her. She once said, "You take what they give you, and you make it yours." And she did just that. Her big break came in the film Dead End, 1937, where she played a broken-down prostitute, a role few actresses of her time dared to touch. It earned her first Oscar nomination. Critics were stunned by her raw honesty. She wasn't afraid to be ugly or vulnerable. In an era when most women were styled to perfection, Claire Trevor showed imperfection, and audiences loved her for it. Through the 1940s, she became known as the queen of film noir. Smart, sharp-tongued, but always with a trace of sadness behind her eyes. Films like Murder, My Sweet, and Born to Kill made her a staple of the genre. She played women who'd seen too much, loved too hard, and lost it all, roles that mirrored the struggles of real women. Off-screen, but it was 1948's Key Largo that changed everything. Working opposite Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, she played Gay Dawn, a faded nightclub singer trapped in a world of men, desperation, and regret. Director John Huston decided she would sing her big emotional scene without rehearsal, without warning. When she asked why, Huston said, "Because Gay wouldn't get to practice either." That one cruel choice led to one of the most powerful performances in film history. Claire's voice cracked. Her hands trembled, her eyes filled with tears. There were no retakes, just pure emotion. And when the scene ended, the set stood silent. Everyone knew they'd witnessed something real. That performance earned Claire Trevor her first and only Academy Award. But in interviews years later, she admitted she never rewatched the scene. "It was too painful," she said. "That wasn't acting. That was me, all of me, all of me." After Key Largo, the offers poured in. But Claire had grown tired of playing the same kind of woman. Broken, tragic, desperate. She wanted something lighter, something that let her breathe. Still, Hollywood had other plans. By the 1950s, she began to see what many actresses of her generation faced: ageism. The same studios that once celebrated her were now calling her too old for leading roles. But Claire refused to fade quietly. She turned to television and theater, proving that true talent never expires. In night, she received yet another Oscar nomination for The High and the Mighty. Even as new stars rose, Claire's artistry reminded everyone why the golden age existed in the first place. Off-screen, though, her life was quieter. She had loved deeply and lost. Her marriage to producer Milton Bryn was one of stability, but she never spoke much about her private struggles. Those who knew her said she carried a quiet sadness, but also a deep strength. In her later years, she devoted herself to philanthropy. At the University of California, Irvine, she funded the Claire Trevor School of the Arts, ensuring that generations of young artists could pursue their dreams. She didn't want statues or spotlights. She wanted to leave behind something that mattered. When she passed away in 2000 at the age of 90, tributes poured in from across Hollywood. Actors, directors, and fans alike remembered her as the woman who brought truth to the screen when everyone else was pretending. Film historian Leonard Maltin once said, "When Claire Trevor cried, America cried with her." Because she wasn't acting, she was sharing something deeply human. Even now, more than 2 decades after her death, her performances still feel fresh, alive. Watch Key Largo, and you'll see it, that trembling vulnerability, that flicker of strength fighting through fear. That's timeless, it's real, it's Claire Trevor. She may not have been the biggest star of her era, but she was one of the truest. And sometimes, truth shines brighter than fame ever could. For those who chase fame, Remember Claire Trevor, a woman who chose honesty over illusion and left behind a legacy that still whispers through Hollywood's golden halls.